coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Losing that feeling of, hey, being human's good news after all, let's make a go of it. I think that you can, walk and chew gum psychologically in that respect. It's doable, and that from that kind of cast of mind, the kind of statecraft we need now is thinkable, is possible, and is something that doesn't just require, smarter and smarter people. Like, we've seen what the smart people can do, and a lot of smart people are sort of not who you want to be in charge, especially in a moment like this. Some of them are good, some of them do good stuff. There is, I think, a colorable argument that everything's falling apart. Like, engineers to the front of the line, make sure that, the nukes don't go off and that the supply chain doesn't collapse. That's reasonable. But we're gonna need more, much more from more than just the engineers, more than just the smarty pantses. And I think, that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for people who feel like surplus elites. It's an opportunity for people who feel like the forgotten man. So, all hands on deck.
Hello, and welcome once again to The Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast from The American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of The American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined once again by a full roster. James Poulos, editor of The American Mind, Seth Barron, managing editor, and Ryan Williams, publisher and president of the Claremont Institute. And we, as often happens to us, we recorded an episode last week right before major news cycle event. So we're going to play a little bit of catch up today by revisiting the speech that President Biden delivered at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. If you saw any of the GIFs, the memes, the images that are still circulating from this speech, you will see what I mean when I refer to him as President Palpatine. This is, the iconic building lit up in what, from bird's eye view, I guess was supposed to be red, white, and blue, but immediately around Biden turned out to be just bathing him in red light from behind as he, did his classic old man yells at cloud Biden gestures, shaking his fist and screaming and haranguing us. It truly, the optics of it alone were enough to, I don't know, you can't make these sorts of things up. If you had created this meme online by using Photoshop, people would have said, well, that's just over the top. You're going too far, but it's real. It's not even doctored. That's just what they decided it was best for him to look like as he delivered this speech, which matched the content to the forms. What does it? Suit the action to the word to the action. This was a perfect marriage of optics and content. As predicted before he gave this speech, Joe Biden came out with grand narrative that the soul of the nation is under threat from an encroaching and creeping attack upon our democracy from none other than the MAGA Republicans. Let me read the kind of classic citation from this speech, some of this rhetoric, and then I will hand it over to the gang. Here's Biden. He says, "We the people have burning inside each of us the flame of liberty that was lit here at Independence Hall, a flame that lit our way through abolition, the Civil War, suffrage, the Great Depression, world wars, civil rights. That sacred flame still burns now in our time as we build an America that is more prosperous, free, and just. That is the work of my presidency, a mission I believe in with my whole soul. But first, we must be honest with each other and with ourselves. Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Now, I want to be very clear up front, not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. But it is my duty, my painful duty, to level with you, to tell the truth no matter how difficult MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They are determined to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose, no right to privacy, no right to contraception, no right to marry who you love. It goes on, and I'm even kind of editing as I go here by cutting out some of these other repetitive sections. But as has been now amply pointed out, this is a kind of ramping up, really drastic ramping up of rhetoric that has already been a staple of the Biden administration. In the same breath as Biden calls for unity and harmony, he also defines out of political legitimacy an entire swath, a sort of indeterminate swath of his opponents. He claims that this is not all Republicans, and then he goes on to list some things that are in dispute on the right, such as the 2020 election, and other things that sound pretty mainstream Republican to me. Objection to gay marriage, maybe not a majority view, but certainly a major view on the right. Objection to abortion, increasingly important and certainly widespread Republican attitude. And painting all of this as dangerous extremism that needs to be stamped out via unspecified methods from our republic because of the threat it poses to, quote, our democracy. I think a lot of us, maybe all of us here, read the speech, but Ryan Williams, I'm going to kick it over to you first because you actually, for your sins as an act of self-harm, you watched the speech. And I thought I would just start by asking you what, if anything, stuck out to you from tuning in.
Given the time zone difference here on the West Coast, that ended my day here at the office, more or less, 5 p.m. Our time. No, everyone, we don't keep banker's hours here. So I do work after 5, but it was sort of the tail end of my day here at the office. Yeah, I was struck. I believe my initial tweet about it was, kind of slurry old man rant in a way. But I think the backdrop of the speech is more important or more interesting. I mean, Biden has always been a third-rate demagogue in American politics and a mediocre liar of sorts. I mean, he has kind of always said what the moment or what he thought the moment dictated that he should say, given where his party was or where the action in his party was at any given time. So, you go back to the 80s and 90s, and he's tough on crime and sort of against, tough on crime, especially crime in the inner city that is black crime and all the rest. And now he's kind of the avatar at the head of one of the most woke administrations, if not actually the most woke administration yet to grace the American political scene. So none of that is surprising. Biden sort of rolling with the leading edge of the zeitgeist of the Democratic activist party, or the activist section of the Democratic Party. That all makes perfect sense. But, there's been these rumors that it's not rumors, that it's been reported that John Meacham has been consulting with the Biden campaign first and now the administration, that he had a big hand in this. This is a historian, liberal historian, sort of mainstream historian, John Meacham. He's sort of gotten into Biden's head, and there were reports early on that Biden was told he could be a truly transformative and great Democratic president. So you saw some flourishes of that in the speech. Biden bragging about, the biggest healthcare reform since Obamacare, the biggest expansion of the biggest infrastructure thing since the Great Society. I forget all the comparisons or historical comparative notes that he hit, but it all kind of rang a little hollow in the midst of rampant inflation, sort of. What the hell are we doing there? Stumbling forward billions and billions and billions of dollars for Ukraine, or even the Afghanistan withdrawal before that. The sort of rhetorical high notes were put in stark relief with the actual facts of the Biden administration and the state of the country at this moment. So that was all pretty jarring. I was exchanging some messages with one of our group chats with some Claremont friends, senior fellow types and friends of Claremont from recent years who've now become friends. One of the great perks of my job, an ever expanding intelligent right wing friend group. And the consensus was this is how you regard speeches in administrations, especially major policy addresses or major line in the sand addresses, which I think this was. This was a kind of fatwa for the rest of the Democratic establishment and the administration. That is to say, this is our stance now, this is our rhetoric now, this is how we're going to talk about electoral politics going forward. And that's pretty troubling because the one of the major themes of the speech, if not the major theme, the one that really stood out, is precisely what you said, Spencer, which is to say that there's a certain portion of Americans, MAGA Republicans, that are a threat to democracy, a threat to our rights in sort of an unprecedented way. This is eliminationist rhetoric. It's never a good thing to see in domestic politics. The left like to accuse Trump of this, but it really wasn't his style. If you go back and actually read Trump's major speeches, it's nothing like this. So that's pretty troubling. And it's really, I think it's meant to direct the rest of the executive branch, especially policymakers, on how to talk about the current political fight. Also, I forget who did it. Steve Hayward talked about this on one of the Powerline podcasts recently. Oh, I think it was one of the Washington Post sort of right-wingers, not the Never Trump one, but the other one. Forgive me. You know who you are. Forgive me. It'll come to me. But he went back and looked, and this was really the first major primetime address from a president that was this partisan. I mean, they're usually reserved for, in George W. Bush's case, in Obama's case, in Trump's case, they're usually reserved for discussions of major foreign policy events or war stuff, or for financial crises stuff, not a sort of taking of accounts of domestic political opposition. So in all these ways, this speech was very unprecedented. I should be regarded as very troubling. I think a lot of America, at least the portion of America that tuned into it, in a weird way, it was sort of timed not really to be watched live. I don't know if that matters, but it was competing with two major college football games in Pennsylvania, the sort of opening of college football season. The timing was bad. They'd asked the major networks to cover it. None of them did really, except for MSNBC and CNN. So it's a weird, I don't know, it's a weird thing. But the national, I'll just end with this. The national response seems to have been one of being troubled by it. And so the administration, either through the press secretary in her kind of stumbling, half-competent way, or through Biden himself getting asked questions around the place, or sort of refining his talking points, they've been walking it back in various ways. Biden asked the next day or the day after the next day by Peter Doocy, do you mean that all Trump voters are enemies to rights and threats to democracy? And Biden said, no Trump voters. I don't mean any Trump voters. Which leads you to wonder, what do you mean by MAGA Republicans then? Also, Biden's now taken to calling them extreme MAGA Republicans. I think extreme came up in the speech, but now this is the modifier to try to put some distance between normal Trump voters and the group he's talking about. The press secretary, what's her name again, Spencer? I always forget.
Karine Jean-Pierre, my second favorite person after Jen Psaki in the world. Yeah.
She was asked yesterday, maybe, again by Doocy or someone, it doesn't matter who asked her. But she said, no. Biden was very clear. He means office holders, not normal voters. So it's classic Biden administration thing. The left wing driving policy and rhetoric, the president sort of being a mouthpiece for that, half consciously, I think. Blowback the next day or in the coming days, sort of walking back of it, gaslighting, lying about it. This is our return to normalcy, rhetorically and as a matter of policy, which we were promised with Biden getting elected. So in that sense, it's a perfect representation of all the dysfunctions of this administration. I would say, we could kind of dismiss it and laugh it off, but for the fact that it's a major escalation in our domestic political rhetoric. And it's just yet another marker on our descent after having stepped across the threshold of revolution, if I can be a bit melodramatic and quote our late, great colleague, Angelo Codevilla, who, used the occasion of that essay, now 3 years old, I think, but one of our more popular ones in the last 4 or 5 years on the American Mind, to talk about these kind of cycle of escalatory rhetorical and political events that you witness across the history of republics, and how this cycle or descent that we're in does not bode well for the future stability of the country or the preservation of civic peace. So shame on President Biden for exacerbating all those problems and for continuing to raise the temperature, even if he only knows about half of what he's doing.
Well, it is a problem. And, there was this scuttlebutt during the time of the previous administration, that there were sort of like competing factions and what's a guy like Mnuchin doing in there and on and on. And, if anything, that problem seems to be in a sense worse in the current administration. You can tell that there are divides in there and tensions, but instead of having a sort of balancing effect, it seems like, certainly the faction or the group of interests that was responsible for that speech and for the presentation of that speech and those who rallied around it and said, yes, more, please. There doesn't seem to be any effective check on that faction. And even if this is an instance of those in charge not really being in control, the uncontrolled sort of lashing out of that faction is something that it appears there's really kind of no power center in Washington right now that is capable of stopping them from lashing out in that way. Opinions differ, I think, on the right as to whether that kind of chaotic energy is capable of really bringing pain to normal, well-adjusted Americans trying to maintain sanity and keep the wheels on the wagon. I think that the damage that can be done is substantial, especially, if and when things economically and financially take a turn for the worse. Winter is coming, as they say, and our energy situation, as we'll probably talk about later on, is better than what's going on in Europe, but the broader indicators leave plenty of room for, I think, well-founded concern. And, Joe Biden is clearly not capable of maintaining personal control over his own messaging. This is the guy who periodically admits that, he's not really allowed to call on the journalists, who even those who have been handpicked to throw softballs at him. And so, all bets are off, I think, at this moment. And it'll be interesting to see in the wake of these kind of weird walkbacks that you alluded to, Ryan, what the next tortured posturing is going to be. Speaking of which, I'm for one, I'm just relieved that Spencer did not refer to Emperor Sniffetween.
Oh, no. Well, I'm afraid that's the end of this episode of the Roundtable. We just have to. I'm sorry, it's not as much content as we usually bring you, but we simply can't go on.
We have a bad pun, black ball that just ends everything. It all comes crashing down.
It's a singularity.
I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is this speech. I mean, it's coming in the middle of like a major campaign season, in the middle of the campaign season. So this must have been poll tested, I would think, but it wasn't shown widely. Like, what is the point? Who are they? Is this all they have to go on? I mean, I know we talked about this last week, and it's kind of a recurring theme for me. I just don't understand. Are there a lot of Democrat voters, like outside of the hallowed halls of Twitter, who are really passionate about the January 6th insurrection and that whole narrative, and MAGA Republicans, ultra MAGA Republican fascists trying to tear down, restore Jim Crow and, put women into hijabs or Christian hijabs. I mean, what are they talking about? Who does this resound with? What is the point of this speech? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, is it just to satisfy some hardcore woke people in his administration? Because from what I've heard, is he's the one who really wanted to give this speech. He really thought this is the thing to do. This will establish me as a great leader. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I hope my fondest hope is that, yes, Biden genuinely does think that there's a significant portion of the electorate out there who are accurately represented by like awfuls on Twitter, and that he's wrong and that this is backfiring in precisely that way. Like at time will tell. It certainly looks to me like the closest thing they've got to distraction, right? Their strategy, the Democrat strategy going into this midterm is surely going to be like, don't look at inflation, don't look at war, don't look at gas prices, don't look at energy, don't look at all these crises, look over there, the big bad man, or even just not the big bad man anymore. Like they're hoping, I think, even to abstract it away from Trump, at least Trump as an actual like human person with a role to play in our politics. And just, I mean, isn't that kind of the point of like Ultra MAGA and Magamus Prime and like Trumptimus Opticon and all of these kind of big gestural words that he's coming up with? Is like, there's just a big bad out there, and we're not exactly going to tell you who it is, or we're going to tell you and then we're going to tell you another thing, and we're not going to tell you like what they actually want to do. These are the bads. And like, I do think that's been a successful strategy for them in the past, but like, you know, the rent does come due, and a lot, as we're going to get into talking about, like a lot of the numbers are just like bad. I will say one other thing before we move on from this topic, and that is like, it's really fun to watch and kind of indicative, I think, of the just emptiness of this rhetoric when it comes to actual reality. Like the point of it is to abstract away from reality and for words not to refer to any objective facts. Like, here's an opinion piece from Jason Nichols, senior lecturer in the African American Studies Department at the University of Maryland College Park. This is in Newsweek. President Biden is right. MAGA Republicans are a threat to our democracy. And I'm just going to read the first line of this piece. President Biden has stopped tiptoeing around the issue of protecting democracy against bad faith actors who would crush what was built and refined since 1776. Just on a whim, out of curiosity, I Googled Jason Nichols 1619. And sure enough, hit number one is in no other venue than Fox News, an opinion piece by Jason Nichols. George Floyd protests, a long time coming, why they won't end soon. First line of this one, George Floyd is a martyr. Scroll down a couple paragraphs. Since 1619, America has placed its knee on the necks of black people, while others who had the opportunity to intervene stood idly by and watched. So it's pretty rich to now see the Democrats become the party of like, WTF, I love 1776 now. But also, I think, really predictable and totally indicative of how divorced from any kind of, you know, serious or sensible argument this kind of talk is. It's very much to confuse Twitter with real life. I just hope that Twitter hasn't become more of real life than we thought. I mean, to turn around from, I mean, the premise of the 1619 Project is that the principles of 1776, the documents of 1776 and the founding, are implicitly or secretly, you know, designed to sneak in defenses of slavery, defenses of evil, right, in the very DNA, anti-Black racism. And so, yeah, this thing about like our democracy as we, you know, tear the fabric of our social cohesion apart is like, I don't know. One hopes that indeed it is closer to Twitter than to real life, but we're gonna find out, that's for sure. Let's talk a little bit about real life and metrics. We've got a couple news stories that our faithful producer Jake tossed our way about schools. One of which is that there's a school in Wisconsin, probably not the only such school, directing teachers in a presentation. And excuse me, this is not just a school, but the Eau Claire area school district directing teachers that parents are not entitled to know their kids' identities, i.e. if your kid comes to school and wants to transition, you don't get to know. The other one is this report from the Daily Wire on a new AP class, George Floyd inspired, the African American Studies AP class. All of this in the context of a new report. I'm reading this from the New York Times. The pandemic erased 2 decades of progress in math and reading, remote learning and school shutdowns, and indeed even just masks in schools and the language and socialization barriers that created have set kids back by 20 years. Severe drops really across all ages and races, although obviously some groups, especially low-income groups, affected worse than others. In the decline spanned almost all races as the times and income levels and were markedly worse for the lowest performing students, while top performers in the 90th percentile showed a modest drop, 3 points in math. Students in the bottom 10th percentile dropped by 12 points in math, 4 times the impact. So your kid's not going to be learning any math, science, or literature, but at least they'll be able to recite the creed of George Floyd and get hormones if they want them. Adding to this bleak picture is a drop in life expectancy, which is like something right out of, I don't know, it just feels very medieval. The life expectancy has been dropping, continues to drop. COVID has been a factor in this, obviously, but there's a ton of other stuff that is getting kind of buried in the NPR reports on this. First and foremost on my mind is overdosing, which is affecting, I think, Native American and white communities, although also obviously Black communities. One of the most dramatic drops in life expectancy in 2021 was among American Indian and Alaska Native people. Whites also seeing big drops. I mean, this is just kind of like I don't know. This is a stew of like everything is getting worse. I mean, don't you guys sort of think this is the stuff that the Ultra MAGA is designed to direct our attention away from? It's hard to read this in anything but a depressing and negative light.
Yeah, indeed. I don't know if it's a function of my getting older and more jaundiced, but yes, American life appears to be really rocketing to the bottom. It seems that what used to be considered sort of like, I mean, we lead the world in single parent family households. We lead the world in out of wedlock births. The fact that we have 100,000 deaths by overdose every year, which doesn't seem to perturb anybody. That's like double the number of people who died on our side in the Vietnam War over the course of 20 years, like every year. It's just staggering. The fact that we have 250,000 people flowing into the country every month illegally on the southern border. And this is all sort of, I mean, look, it seems really dire, but I don't get the sense that there's a real sense of emergency. I don't want to say that, society is in total collapse, but, shoplifting is up everywhere. I mean, what is that? I mean, just shoplifting as a new mode of, getting what you need or what you want. Just the idea that become kind of like normative to walk into stores and just walk out with stuff. And it's not really, anybody's business, and nobody really seems to care. And this is just becoming endemic. I don't know. I don't want to sound like the ultimate sort of like grumpy old man just kind of sitting on his porch watching the world like go to hell, but it's hard not to feel that way a little bit. And I do sort of feel as though an accelerating tendency, at least from my perspective. I mean, I don't know if you saw this, but Illinois passed bail reform. They're eliminating cash bail for almost every crime, including second-degree murder. Now, this is in a state, in a city like Chicago, that has like crime has gone through the roof already. So how is this? And it's called the safety bill. I don't know. Sorry to sound like Paul Harvey on a bad day, but it seems pretty grim.
I guess I would say that, it's time to stop worrying about America falling into ruin and just recognizing and accepting that we are in the ruins. They're here. We don't need to put more emotional labor into kind of like agonizing over the prospect that we will be in ruins. Like, it's here, and and it's not the end. We're not doomed. We're just in a very bad way. And the work of statecraft is, in this case, going to have to be oriented around building, reconstructing up out of the ruins. Not an impossible task. Countries, peoples have done it periodically throughout history. And, for all the pathetic and, uncanny qualities of this particular ruin that we find ourselves in, it's still not millions dead. It's still not buildings bombed out. It's still not like lingering radiation for decades. It's a different kind of misery, of immiseration, which is unnerving and psyching a lot of people out. And, the number of people I hear from or see online who are like, I would love to do something. I'm ready to do something. Someone please tell me what to do, but I don't know what to do. I'm sort of out of ideas. It's a lot. And I think sort of recognizing the absolute state that we are in, and recognizing that it's bad, but it's not doom. Once you kind of clear those couple of hurdles, I guess maybe there's a smaller hurdle of like, yes, penitence is good and everything, but losing that feeling of, hey, being human's good news after all, let's make a go of it. I think that you can, walk and chew gum psychologically in that respect. It's doable, and that from that kind of cast of mind, the kind of statecraft we need now is thinkable, is possible, and is something that doesn't just require, smarter and smarter people. Like, we've seen what the smart people can do, and a lot of smart people are sort of not who you want to be in charge, especially in a moment like this. Some of them are good, some of them do good stuff. There is, I think, a colorable argument that like, oh, everything's falling apart. Like, engineers to the front of the line, make sure that, the nukes don't go off and that the supply chain doesn't collapse. Like, yeah, that's reasonable. But we're gonna need more, much more from more than just the engineers, more than just the smarty pantses. And I think, that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for people who feel like surplus elites. It's an opportunity for people who feel like the forgotten man. So, all hands on deck.
Well put.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the point that things don't have to be, when you start talking about this stuff, you immediately think, and many people often point out, it could get much, much worse. The span of human experience still contains like enormous pits of misery and despair into which most of us like have not yet fallen. Thanks be to God. All of this acknowledged while at the same time saying like, things are getting worse. There is a kind of creep to this decline, which is itself really demoralizing, as James nicely laid out. And the one other thing that I would like to add is like, yeah, things are kind of sucky in their own right, but also just, this is America. Like, I don't even just want things to be okay. I want everything to be awesome and getting bigger and better all the time. Like, I want like life expectancy to be through the roof. I want us to have the best marriage rates in the world. Like, I want our technology to be better than everybody else. I want everybody to be begging us to trade with them. Like, this is what we're supposed to be. And that I think one of the depressing factors with all of this, relentless bad news and just declining indicators is that it just lowers your sights so that you feel like you will settle for just groceries that you can afford or like a thermostat that you can turn on. But part of what I think James is rightly, issuing is a call to like, it won't be enough to just sort of try to get by and be okay. Like, we have to recover our sense that like actually tools and capacities and talent are there on the table for us to actually be incredible. Like, it's not over for us by a long shot, and there's still a lot that we can do to bring this country back into the 21st century in a positive sort of way. Okay, let's talk about one more depressing thing, having attempted to do a little uplift, and that is the situation in California with energy. We did touch on this last week when we talked about the environmental regulation situation just more generally, and some of the really bonkers laws that are getting passed in Europe, especially. I think since we had that conversation, the Nord Stream pipeline, of course, has been shut down indefinitely, leaving Europe facing a winter of astronomical energy prices, even beyond what they were already facing. This is something that Trump predicted and was laughed at about a while back. So that is the situation abroad. At home, California has been sending out these push notifications. Or those of us who are still in California can tell me whether this was just one notification or whether this has been kind of a regular occurrence. But I'm reading one now that came to, I guess, everybody's phone in California. Conserve energy now to protect public health and safety. Extreme heat is straining the state energy grid. Power interruptions may occur unless you take action. Turn off or reduce non-essential power if health allows now until 9 p.m. We were joking off mic that in the future, these notifications will say things like, I'm sorry, Dave, but your house thermostat, your smart thermostat can't go up above 80 degrees in August. Those of you that get that reference, y'all are boomers. But no, I mean, to be a little more serious, like this is the beginning of the real kind of indicators of what these environmental policies have wrought. They're going to talk about, climate change and how it's all the fault of global warming. But surely, a big part of this is like, having to plug in 1 million electric cars and shutting down the sources of energy that might be both sustainable and effective, which, as we have discussed, is something that, you can do. These are not unsolvable problems, but it seems like California and other blue states are just hell-bent on making the problems worse. What do you guys think? Is this the trough for California, or are we headed into, a much more regular kind of power grid crisis for them?
It reminds me, it's sort of like, 1984-ish in some weird, it's like this, or actually more like Animal Farm, like, comrades, look, we're doing a major transition to a new way of life. And in the meantime, yes, there's going to be struggle. There's going to be privation. But in the future, after the $3 trillion in green energy subsidies have been distributed, it's going to be great. It's going to be like, the big, what's the song? The Big Cloud, the Candy Mountain. Yeah. Everything is, you're going to have as much air conditioning as you want. You're going to have fast cars that go everywhere for free. It's going to be great. Just for now, no showers, or shower once a week, no meat, and no air conditioning. And we're locking down. And thankfully we've got your refrigerator is connected to the internet, so we can we're just going to dial it down so your milk goes bad. I mean, this is the promise of the green energy, and we're seeing this in Europe. I mean, God knows they did this to themselves. They turned off their own energy refining capacity, and now they're just like, oh wait, now it's dark. And now it's cold. What happened? And these are the countries that put tons of money into wind and solar. It's this tremendous lie. And now we've got, to me, this just seemed like so rich that the new person in charge of distributing the $400 billion in climate, green energy subsidies is none other than John Podesta, like the evil genius at the center of everything. Hillary's campaign manager, the guy who let all of the DNC emails get hacked, the emperor of, Ukraine dealings and all of that stuff. So now he's going to get to decide who gets all the money. It's the grift is so palpable and manifest that it's like stunning. It's just stunning. So yeah, I see this as just the immiseration, the elimination of the middle class, and turning everybody into, waiting for the Slumgullion trough to come out to get your helping, while Gavin Newsom is jetting around the country. That's what I see.
Coupled with the one of these perennial aspects of modern aspirational liberalism, which is, if we think it and speak it, it will be so. Sort of completely ignoring unintended consequences and all the rest. There's some headlines out of Europe today. Daily Mail today was Switzerland considers jailing anyone who heats a room above 19 degrees Celsius for up to 3 years if the country is forced to ration gas due to Ukraine war. You know, this is where the new aspirational gig green post climate change left wing economy runs into the reality of the real world and energy needs and all the rest. People are, of course, saying that Trump is totally vindicated from when he, went to the UN and told the Germans and others that they might regret becoming dependent on Russian energy, and they all scoffed and laughed. As for trough versus the beginning of a long series of painful accommodations to painful necessity, Spencer, in California, I think it's the latter. It will get worse, especially because we have a political class in the blue coastal areas. It's exacerbated in California because of the kind of natural cycles of drought and all the rest. But it's a political class that, as Seth said, is both insulated from the consequences of its policy decisions, but also kind of either naive or mendacious about them. So, or have this misplaced view that somehow some breakthrough technology will save them before it gets so bad as to, to cripple their middle classes in their states or whatever. There's this sort of rumor that in the Obama administration, Obama had quipped that, one of his senior energy advisors told him that, it'll all be fine because by 2024, fossil fuel, we'll no longer really need fossil fuels all that much, or some absurd thing. So I think it's incumbent upon us and people who are more knowledgeable about us, people like our friend Steve Hayward, or people even more into the depths of this than Steve, people who are actual experts on energy and energy provision and all the rest, to use these opportunities, of which there will be more, I think, especially in our bluer states, use these as opportunities to criticize the left and to actually, I wanted to chime in on our last segment as just on a note of optimism, or maybe half optimism. In times of decline, scleroticism, incompetence, and ideological policymaking rather than practical policymaking, there will be lots of opportunities, I think, for the display of true insight, analysis, the exercise of excellence, both in coalition building and also lots of opportunities to make political hay out of your domestic political opponent's tendency to run repeatedly headfirst into economic realities. So everyone should be thinking intelligently about what to do about that and how to talk about all that. So I think, because these are classic bread and butter issues. I mean, these hit normal voters very hard. Inflation, an energy bill that triples unexpectedly. I mean, these things are, they're what political revolutions are made of, or if I can talk a little less hyperbolically, they're what realigning elections or realigning political coalitions are made of. So it's part of the strategy amongst the sane in American politics should be to leverage these opportunities and to take advantage of these crises. And I think there seems to me to be emerging a nice mix of cultural politics or political war and sort of classic economic bread and butter issues that might make for continued gains for the normal party, whichever party decides to be that party.
You guys just don't get it, man. I'm headed for a land that's far away beside the Crystal Fountain. So come with me. We'll go and see the Big Rock Candy Mountain. Great recording of that on the Oh Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack as a side note. But no, I actually said that point that you made about, everything sucks and is getting worse now. But if you just do more of it, things will get better. That is a psychological tick or gesture that fascinates me. Not to plug my book or whatever, but I wrote about it a little bit in How to Save the West, like this thing where there's so many different areas where this applies. Currently being online and being in social media makes us, sick, depressed, miserable, unhappy, fat, lonely. The list goes on. And so the solution, obviously, to all of our problems is to be like 100% online all the time, like for our entire consciousness to just be always glued to a screen. Like there are so many versions of this, and I guess it's a form of utopianism. I guess it's like, it's just that the proletariat haven't revolted enough yet. It's just that we don't, have enough food rationing or whatever. But I have a hard time, understanding it without some form of like messianic or religious dimension to it. That like this idea that our suffering inherently sort of redeems us and it's all kind of in service of a higher purpose, like all these things that are true about human suffering from a religious perspective, but then just get like flattened onto the secular plane and become incredibly miserable and immiserating ways of keeping people content with worse and worse forms of life. Like that is just a very deep-seated psychological gesture. It seems to me part of socialism and progressivism. I wanted to ask you guys, since now we've talked about a range of, areas of decline, and, Ryan brought up, I think, the really important next question or point, which is these are obviously, human tragedies, and we shouldn't lose sight of that, that sorrowful dimension of them, but they're also opportunities for people that, think hopefully like us and our friends who think that we can see a way out of these sorts of self-destructive habits and tendencies. What would you guys say is, are there signs of this kind of life specifically or hope, either politically or culturally, things that you think are indicative of good ways to seize this opportunity and make a little inroads toward the good and the true?
Well, I just said there are. Isn't that enough, Spencer? Why are you asking for details here?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to check your notes here. Show your work, Ryan.
No, I mean, it's just the age-old, in crisis, there's opportunity. So I just think, look, the instances in which this opportunity could be taken advantage of are kind of infinite in a way, and the circumstances will make themselves apparent as they emerge. But I just think this is something we ought to be thinking about. And, there's this old saying, Seth will maybe remember who this was, something that can't go on forever won't. And it's kind of a cope on the right that, right. It's often used in matters of debt or things like that as, something that can't go on forever won't. I don't mean it as a cope, but it does speak to a fundamental truth, which is that you can only run into reality and lie about it so much without someone taking advantage of your mendacity and incompetence. So I just think those opportunities will continue to present themselves, and it's up to ambitious and enterprising individuals and politicians and even community leaders to take advantage of these things and exploit them against and use them to unseat the incompetent and the corrupt to try to reform, which is, to get back to our old friend Leo Strauss, the main theme of political science, going back all the way to Aristotle, is always, in a way, reform or regime health. Perfect justice is impossible. The best we can do is kind of muddle through and tinker and do the most good and the least harm. And so the matter of regime health is a constant thing. It's, you're constantly gardening. And, we've got a lot of weeds right now. So, start with the biggest ones and get after it. This has been a great theme of mine for this podcast, I think. Not every episode, but it's certainly what keeps me coming to work every day, which is, we all ought to be happy warriors. We ought not to lose faith in the American people. And we, what else should we be doing besides this, which is fighting to keep America decent and free. We're in a bit of a crisis time, and we have been for a couple decades, and it seems to be escalating of late. But it's not like we're all going to move to Panama or something. So we all need to keep writing, thinking, and trying to help our fellow citizens and our political leaders fix these problems. That's good work to do.
Yeah, I would say. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Seth. Go ahead.
Well, just quickly, like Winston Smith says, if there is hope that lies with the trolls, and maybe troll isn't the right word, but with the people, with the public, I think that there's something salutary about the fact that like 4 or 5 years of just constant shrieking about fascism, racism, deplorability, collusion, all of that stuff has not really shaken and all from the bearers of the big megaphone have not really shaken the confidence of, I don't know, 70 to 100 million Americans who continue to look at the lies of the regime and just call them what they are. And they've been vindicated again and again. And if you look at what's been happening with all of the COVID mythography lately, it's sort of like falling apart. So, a lot of people who put their lives and their jobs on the line and were, forced out of employment and refused to go along with this, I think what will really be seen as an actual kind of fascistic eruption, like the masking and school closures and all of that, all the restrictions, which all sort of turned out to be, unnecessary, useless, beside the point. Vaccination is now, oh, well, actually, it didn't really work. The fact that, we still have a lot of people in this country who are willing to say, no, you're full of it. I think that there is still something hopeful there. The fact that only 8%, I think even of the Democrats really ascribe to the woke ideology fully. I mean, they're bullied by it, but I don't know. There's probably room. I think there's room to maneuver.
Yeah, many opportunities. At the same time, as important, I think, wisdom, for what it's worth, as important as it is to remain attuned to matters of destiny in your personal life and in your immediate social life, patience is important too. And you don't get to have the impact that you want at the time you want, in the place that you want, just because you're frustrated or whatever. You've got to sometimes be patient and wait. And the difficulty of doing that while also sort of maintaining the urgency and having ears to hear, it can be intense. And I think that kind of pressure is taking its toll on even, relatively well-positioned people sometimes. But I think there's really no escape from it. And, if you feel underutilized or hitting your head against the wall, I mean, these are feelings that people feel characteristically in life, and especially in a moment like this when so much seems to be hanging in the balance and where this kind of shadow tug of war is going through, another round of weird twists and turns. Do not despair. And that's not necessarily a sign that anything is going wrong for you in your life. And, make sure that you have people around who you can talk to about it, because the more isolated that we are, the more time that we spend sort of brooding and getting lost in those hallways of egotism, whether it's, megalomania or self-defeating attitudes, the easier it is for us to convince ourselves that we should kind of give up or tap out. The easier it is for us to conclude that, maybe we're worthless after all. Keep talking, stay present with those around you who care about you. And, I think that attitude goes a long way. And I think, there will be plenty of occasions where our patience will be tested, as well as our ambition. And if we can sort of prepare ourselves mentally and spiritually for that, then we'll do okay.
Well, that's beautifully put. And there you have it. We managed to wrest some optimism and encouragement from the jaws of decline and of everything getting worse. The Roundtable, ladies and gentlemen. More optimism for your decline. All right, that's all the time we have. It's been a pleasure as always. Thank you all for listening to The Roundtable. If you want to learn more, visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, and our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. You can donate to support the show at claremont.org/donate, and do not forget to rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. A 5-star review not only lifts our spirits, but also helps people find out about the show, which is a great way to support us. At the very least, if you have criticisms, keep them to yourself or send them an email and don't put them in the star reviews. Mostly kidding, but 5-star reviews really do help. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you all next week.